everything's off. Everything's off. Okay.
Oh, here. Okay.
Now try.
No, it's not black.
Okay, hold on. No.
Wait, no.
What?
This is a button. Power.
Oh, it's
That's like a wrap. Cable to here, and then there's no power. You can plug it in, put it down the ground. It was like, what? Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, we're powered out. Okay. There we go. Joy, these aren't in order on the
That's okay.
All right, so let's start with the first one. And Liam was starting this one.
cornerstone.
Yeah. Cornerstone, how great thou art, on the chain with the ring. So I really hate this ending song. Or ending sad song. It's not Easter yet. I'll send that for my Easter, the pre-Easter set. Anyways.
On Facebook?
Yeah.
You think it's better than YouTube?
It'll reach your audience more directly
Really?
because you don't have to. Anything that it causes resistance.
All right, go.
Make them go.
Hope is built in glass. When Jesus' blood and righteousness dare not cross Spirit's grave, but wholly trust in Jesus. Christ alone, cornerstone.
Stay.
give you the salty bar. Okay. But that was okay, right? Like halfway
I
through
just
this.
consciousness.
Just full between the first course and second course.
Hey, Brian, can you give me the order like right now?
Cornerstone,
Whenever-
how great thou art, unashamed, and praise.
Yeah, instead of doing different. See?
Here's the first one. How great thou art. We have to figure out how to transition from that slow start to do fast.
Oh, we're doing that in seconds.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't want to do that as the last one. That's why I did rating as the last one. It's still like more like that. Not like,
I can, so I'll start out with this one. And
sure.
then CT will-
Hit the 4 beats.
and then we'll just follow.
Ready? Okay. Okay. All right. Start. Okay, pause.
We just spread it out.
So like
We need to do double the speed of that.
double speed, right?
Yeah.
So try to start right away. So give you an intro.
That's the listening speed as when I did it before.
But we doubled up on his speed.
Or you're saying it's faster?
Yeah,
Yeah,
when
okay.
he calls it in, we need to.
But intro, how would you guys do for the intro?
You're just doing that.
Yeah.
So it's half speed.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
It doesn't matter. Just 1, 2, 3, 4.
Saves my soul. I'll pray. Saves my soul, my faith, God. I'll pray thou art. I'll pray thou art. My soul, my Savior, I'll say that. It's my soul, my Savior, I'll say that. I'll say that. When I You might go faster if you can sustain the speed. No, for me. You go a bit faster.
Really?
I know, I was like, you want to go faster? It doesn't matter.
People have to be able to hear you.
You're early! It's like not even 10! Early! So yeah. Unashamed.
You're starting to see.
You're starting. Yeah. Well, that's what it says on my sheet. So.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
Sorry. Can you play the last two?
sure. Yeah.
I have not much to offer you, but hear what she whispered. But still, I come because your cross is placed in my world. Oh, Christ, my pain of sympathy. Secure and your grace extends to all his friends, and the mercy sets me free. I know I need one word to know. That's the grace. Because of your mercy, I stand here. Kind of love, my arms will take let you come down from heaven's heights and bring me faith today. And we join the one
Yeah, just hold it.
Here I am at your feet. My brokenness complete. Here I am at your feet. My brokenness complete. Here I am at your feet. My brokenness complete. Here I am. Because of your mercy, I stand here unashamed. You give me something to lead into for the two bars? Like another 2 bar transitions?
Yeah.
If you had something better transition, Like,
So, you,
there's something I can go back into the A for that one, and then once you make it for the E for that one. That's one bar.
It's been like I really love it. Yeah, I made a fresh batch
I'll tell you for the last one right now.
Whoa!
So the weak cry out one. Just got that one. But let's try What's up? Morning. Do you want coffee or you already have coffee?
They have hazelnut flavored coffee and apple cider. Do you know who coffee is? I think I think as soon as you said
It's a question offer and ask.
This one I'm just building.
Yeah.
So I got it the second first time.
Do you want more? I really don't. No, I'm good. I'm good.
it wasn't your mind to give it. Alternatively,
Alternatively, do you want it? Sure? Okay. I can't eat it now. It's like really service.
You want to try it?
Just a few things.
Spend a few minutes.
Of course.
You want to try it?
Of course.
yes.
Okay, so it's just.
See, I don't know what there's something going
Okay.
You can mute it first. What? That has something. I think we're up.
Oh, you are? When? What time? Wait, well, I'm like, yesterday.
You could come back early, but then you would have to find something to do. And then I could take a break, but it'll be late. It's full now. We thought. There's a man named Sister Man.
Even better breakfast. I got cake.
No, man. That man graduated about 8 years ago. Man's sister, man. You know Man Boy's sister, man. He's at CC. I think she's come here once. And then there's two strangers.
Where's that?
So anyways, her mother had to be convinced
For church?
to get back right.
Oh. Yeah, 10 o'clock is not even close to late. What are we
I was
talking
waiting for my message.
I tried. Like, yeah, she's one of the people I talk to.
Well, she has to get the Richmond Hill down. I'm gonna pick her up and eat. But she has to be all the way up. I'm down. For her, she just needs to take from Richmond Hill, she has to get to the station. What?
Attendance is not too bad.
Don't say that. People show up really late. It was, I think, 10 minutes to scrape all the ice off this car, well, at least enough to see. Like, it was crazy. It's soft, like wet and stuff on top, but where it's through the glass, it's compressed.
Worship team, where are you? Joy. Oh, you know. Alright.
What are you playing? You're playing
Oh, that one Pizza was I don't know. Oh, no, Pizza was that one. Oh, okay, you have to decide. Right? So you tell us that's right. At the end of the show, so usually PT will actually say live stream the last. Yeah, today you decide. So you have all the seven on your side. You don't decide now. You're all to Alright. Do you like water? Thank you for just having coming crazy. I just want to pray that you just keep them safe that they're still coming here in this light spring that we have. But I just want to pray that keep them safe and they're probably late, someone in the driveways or skating through this. I just want to pray that what's speaking to servants today and you speak to it. I just want to pray that we remember to keep the servants apart. I guess remember all this. Good morning. How was everyone enjoying the white celebrating you have this morning? Good? Bad? All right, can everyone rise for worship this morning? Thank you. Hope is built, now stay glad that Jesus' blood and righteousness dare not trust His way, but only trust Jesus and Christ. Oh, mercy. Darkness seems like it's fading. I rest on Him for strength. Every line is spoken. So take this time to say hi to your fellow neighbors, shake hands, introduce yourself, and just go. Good job, good job. Not much to offer you, not near much you your cross has placed in me my word. That's the king of sympathy. Grace extends to all his friends. Mercy sets me free. And I know I'm weak. I know I'm hurt. All the life is because of grace. Because of your mercy, I stand behind. I can't explain this kind of love. All at your feet, in my brokenness, here I am, at your feet, in my brokenness, I am at your feet, in my brokenness, here I am, at your feet, my brokenness, I know I'm unworthy, so that's one day. Because of grace, because of your mercy, I stand. To have this time of worship for you, God. I just want to pray that you just bless Petey's lips as he delivers your words today in the sermon. I just want to pray for all of us who are still making their way here in this light spring that we're having. And I just praise all your holy Christian name. Amen.
I would say it's April 1st after waking up this morning. Surprise! Somebody asked when we are doing tire changes for the season. And well, we're not doing it anytime soon. Actually, last year, if you remember, there was a snow day during the exams in April. We did have a freezing rain and a snow day. But anyways, welcome to Simply Church. You made it here safely. Or some of you may have had a car accident on your way here, but you still made it here, so we're happy to have you here. If you're here for the first time, I'm going to welcome you. AGC is our denomination. I'll be happy to tell you more about ourselves. There are refreshments over there as well as spare Bibles if you need them. And and just help yourself. A couple of things are happening today. We do have Sunday school, just down the hallway to your left, across from the washrooms, and that's the universe next door, and taught by Dr. John Lynn and Jorge on there. Ready to go. Baptism, if you're interested in baptism for Easter, please contact us as soon as possible. This is the last Sunday for your announcement. And if you need a ride today, that might have been a good idea. A couple of pickup locations. If you're outside those spots, please contact us and try to accommodate you. And if you are interested in grocery runs, Tuesday nights, 7:30, sign up, and we'll be happy to pick you up and grab some groceries. If you can't make it, whether a scheduled conflict or whatever, you can send us a shopping list, and we'll be happy to pick it up for you and drop it off. As well, this a lot of areas of service, if you're interested in serving, especially as we get into the next term. If you know people coming back or you're interested in starting next term to serve, please contact us. And, there's so many things you can get involved in. You can get involved at the church office at 282 Marsden Drive, just across from Thomas State College. And place to Monday, Friday, 9:30 to 5:30 is always open, and then after that, at nighttime, on and off, there's quite often still available. And if you're interested in grant cell, if you're part of that demographic group, this Thursday, we're having Bible study, right? So it's back to schedule, right? School is off, and some nights, some prayer items for us as well. Joy, you know what? Let's do the Bible reading first so we can get the hum of the speaker. We're going to read Hosea chapter 1. Well, we're not going to read it. It's very hard. So we're going to ask Joy to put it up, and you guys can follow along with Hosea chapter 1. It's going to be read in ESV, so if you do have ESV on your version, we'll put the words up as well. So let's do that.
The book of Hosea, chapter 1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Levi, in the days of the Hezekiah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, Go, take to yourself a wife of whoredom, and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Boaz, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, Call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. She conceived again and bore a daughter. And the Lord said to him, Call her name No Mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel, to forgive them at all. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen. When she had weaned No Mercy, she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said, Call his name Not My People, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. In the place where it was said to them, You are not my people, it shall be said to them, Children of the living God. And the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head. And they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Hosea 2. Say to your brothers, You are my people.
That's a little better. We may have to get a new cable. So, but the hum affects the live feed that's happening. So for those of you who don't know, we've actually been live feeding on YouTube. Say hi. No, it's over there if you want. And so for some people who are sick, it has been beneficial, and also for John and Joanna with
Toby, they were able to hear the sermon as well, and say, I heard the mercy. So, anyways, glad you made it. We are studying through the book of Hosea, and yesterday night we had Chris and I went to a 60th wedding anniversary, a celebration. 60 years. Can you imagine 60 years of marriage? Some of you who are married, can you imagine being married for 60 years to your significant other? Anyways, tonight I celebrate my parents' wedding anniversary. They're 56 years, right? 56? Yeah. 56. So we're going to celebrate that tonight. It's pretty rare nowadays for people to celebrate 50 or 60, mainly because divorce is so rampant. That's one of the problems. But I was, one of my clients is Manulife, and they were in this weekend, we were talking, and there's some stats that, actually for those of you who are being married, young people especially, your chances of actually getting to a 60th wedding anniversary is actually very high. Because back in the old days, people didn't live so long, but now in modern days, you live a lot longer. Did you know that? If you are a male and you are fairly healthy at the age of 65, the probability of you reaching 92 is very high. That is what the statistics and the insurance companies are working with in terms of numbers. Back in the old days, when I remember what the average lifespan for the average male was 72. And then when I first got my insurance, it was 76. But I didn't realize that in that span, over this probably the last 30 years, that the span has now jumped from the 70s into the 90s. That means we have increased the probability of you living to 90 and a very likelihood. That's the number to use it. So that's kind of scary. That means, I'll be married and living with Chris for a very long time. So we will have a probability of celebrating our 60th wedding anniversary. Anyways, the reality though is that marriages don't last that long, not because of lifespan, but because of people choosing to break the sacrament. And that's the harsh reality, is that divorce rates is actually very high. Not, the latest Barna reports actually show that the statistics in terms of marriage within the Christian church is as high as it is in the secular world. That there is no difference now between us and the world. It's kind of sad about it. Pope Francis called it a crisis of marriage. He actually had two articles. One was written back in 2016, and then in 2018 in October, he reiterated the whole sacrament of marriage itself. He said that the culture is having a marriage problem crisis, and responding to a question from an audience member in the conference he was speaking at, he said he addressed it and said this, the quote I put up there. Basically, he said that people do not understand the commitment of marriage. And I understand fully the biblical concept of that marriage commitment. And though commenting on culture's broad idea of what marriage is all about, I guess the way culture understands it, it's not very controversial at all. But what he said in his interview, and sometimes Pope Francis kind of speaks off the cuff a little bit, how many of you have kept up with some of the things he said? He's made a lot of comments about doctrine that he shouldn't have said anything about. But he suggested that the majority of Catholic marriages are actually invalid. It's highly controversial. You're talking about the Pope telling you that your Catholic marriage is not valid. And of course, a lot of people comment on that. One is a devout Catholic writer for the New York Times named Ross Duhat. And he basically called Pope Francis's statements extraordinary, irresponsible, and ridiculous. And in the Catholic magazine called First Things, I don't know if any of you actually read that, the editor, Matthew Schmidt, said the Pope was flatly wrong and irresponsible for calling marriages null. So it's kind of interesting. Pope Francis says a lot of Catholic marriages are invalid. They're null. Invalid basically said that they're not a real marriage. And in the Catholic tradition, the only way of annulling a marriage is by death If you die, the marriage contract is nulled. And then if the church gives you something called an annulment, okay, so some of you may remember, certain kings during the time in England asked to get divorced and did not get the divorce from the Catholic Church. So which particular king decided to start his own church? Henry VIII, right? He decided that he's going to start his own church, which became the what? Church of England, and had the high priest declare that his marriage was null, so he can marry someone else. So, Francis then went on and said, well, you know what we really need in the Catholic Church is more marriage preparation courses, which makes sense. And a lot of conservatives chided Pope Francis, during post this conference, and because he had said something even more outlandish than just saying that your marriage is not valid, because then a lot of people were questioning your marriage. But he said this. He said that priests should not pressure couples who were cohabitating if they were not already married or intending to get married, that if they were cohabitating, that they should let, and here's the quote, let fidelity ripen. Let fidelity ripen. So there's a whole thing about Christianity and within Christendom, and in the large sense, that cohabitation, or what we would consider, pre-marriage, living together, having all the elements of being married, but not actually married. What we would call in our English law or Canadian law is what? Common law. Okay, common law. That Pope basically told the priest, hey, don't really get down on these people, but rather just let fidelity ripen. That we hope that this common law type of situation will ripen into a full marriage. Wow, I don't know if you understand fully what he implies in this. Basically, he's advocating in some ways that we should have test marriages. We should see about living together, see if it works before we actually get married. That's the implication. Sometimes it's great what God provides for a sermon illustration as well. As I had to speak yesterday night for a couple of minutes, and these words came out of it. And it's incredible, because as we continue our studies in Hosea, the whole passage in Hosea is about marriage. I mean, it's really about a marriage. And it's about a marriage in terms of what God interprets as what a marriage should be. In his eyes, as he decreed it, this is what marriage should be like. But more importantly, this marriage union is a commentary. It's an allegory. It's an illustration of the relationship, the spiritual relationship that God has with Israel, and hence what God has for us. And so last week we noted a few things. We kind of outlined the book, help us to put this book in perspective. As of the minor prophets, this is not so minor. It's actually really major, 14 chapters. I don't know if you had a chance to read over those chapters this week. I encourage you to do so, because we don't have the time to go into all the passages, each chapter by chapter. But we a couple things about Hosea, the man. We noted where he came from. He was the son of Uri, and all this type of things. We noted we didn't really know a lot about him personally, but we knew about his circumstances. We knew about his prophetic contemporaries who was living at that time, and talked about how usually you study Hosea in conjunction with Amos, because the two of them look at the situation from two different lenses. And of course, we have the Isaiah, who is his contemporary. And we have a timeline of what is happening at that point. If you want to look at that. Do we have time? Politically, we knew what was happening at this time. There was a lot of things going on. A lot of bad kings, right? In Israel, there's a whole bunch of bad kings, and Judah, there's basically a little bit of stability, but both Judah and Israel are heading downward. So they're in a downward spiral. From the time of Jeroboam II, when Hosea started his ministry, all the kings subsequent. There's 4 listed there, but there are a total of 6 in total. And
Two of them weren't listed because their reign was so short. Basically, we know that Israel is going to disappear. They're going to get just annihilated because of their sins. And we know that in terms of the person, that a lot of people call Hosea the prophet of love because of what he was doing. He was also the lone prophet who was writing in the northern kingdom as well. He was the one who was dedicated to Israel, and he was the one that most languished over her destiny. He knew the fate of Israel as a kingdom. And so, no doubt, he sees this line, this lineage, the Davidic lineage in Israel, but being a full patriot of Israel, he, of course, is bleeding from the heart. And as a result of his patriotism for Israel, if you read through Hosea, you find that it's very difficult to follow what he has to say. Because he's very, very passionate about what's going on in Israel. And quite often he writes sentences and doesn't really finish a sentence, and then he finishes it off a bit later on. And the same with the schematic type of thing. So when you're reading through Hosea, it gets a little bit lost. You get a little bit lost in it's very difficult because of the fact that his thoughts are scattered all over the place. So, nonetheless, you can divide basically the book of Hosea into two parts. It's very simple. Okay? Chapters 1 to 3 is the marriage. Okay, it's the marriage of an adulterous woman to a faithful husband. That's the story. That's the love story. But from 4 to 14, basically, it is the parallel that this relationship, a real historical relationship, is a reflection of the spiritual relationship that God is having with Israel, the adulterous Israel, as opposed to the faithful Lord. And in a sense, these two parts, of course, are related. And the first part, I would say, is a picture. Well, think of it as a picture. Okay? Chapters 1 to 3 is a picture, and then chapters 4 to 14 is the explanation of the picture. Okay? As we read just chapter 1, it's kind of confusing because first of all, Hosea prophesies over a long time, at least 40 years, probably about 6 years in total. But the bulk of it is over 40 years. And he probably was a very old man, and he saw the decimation of Israel at that point. But the situation that God puts him in is very, very unique. And the problem is this. We have two main problems with chapters 1 through 3. So if you read through chapters 1 to 3 and you think, well, this is a crazy, Hollywood type of script type of movie, you're right. Except if you look at the bigger picture and realize that this is a reflection on God himself, we will come into two dilemmas. First, there's a moral dilemma with the situation. And then there's a textual, you would have to read all the words to understand this, the textual problem. The first problem is this. The moral problem extends from the difficulty of us accepting God telling a man to marry an adulterous woman. Okay? Okay. Most of you are in that dating years type of life, right? And if you're a guy like me, and I remember, praying to God, and I said, I watched my friends date. I watched my sister date. I watched my sister get into depression because of dating. And dating is just tough. It is hard. It is very difficult. It is not an envious thing to be in. And I remember praying to God that I would like you to just write on the wall in blood the name of the woman I'm supposed to find on Facebook or LinkedIn. Back then we didn't have that. We had a yellow paper. But how many of you guys have actually prayed that before? Now let's screw this dating thing. God, I understand your sovereignty. I am loyal, faithful servant. I will do whatever you tell me to do. Marry whoever you tell me to marry. Right? I'm sure a lot of you said that. Especially if you had a bad relationship and you don't want to go through it again. I'm sure all of us have said that, perhaps not just in dating, but in life in general. If God told you what to study, who to marry, what car to buy, whatever it might be, if he dictated his sovereignty over you, you would be what? Obedient. A good Asian kid. And just say yes, right? That would be so easy. Right? But I think if God told me and wrote on the wall that I'm going to marry Stormy Daniels, I would have a problem with that. Like, honestly, I would have a problem with that. I would somehow figure out, yeah, it is miracle happening. This is crazy. And why Stormy Daniels? Oh, how many people don't know who Stormy Daniels is? Okay, because I'm looking with some of you are like, who's Stormy Daniels? No, don't put it back. I was going to actually Google Stormy Daniels, but let's just not say that. Stormy Daniels is the adult movie star who Donald Trump had a relation with. You know, she's the one that had an NDA, and then she broke the NDA, and now you know, okay? No? Anybody? It's been like in the news for like over 2.5 years, ever since Donald Trump got elected. But the point is this. The point is, I think we have an assumption that we will marry who God has dictated into our lives, that God has chosen. Right? Even in the world of free will versus God's sovereignty, and then you have a right to choose. You know, my parents are celebrating their anniversary today, and you know, my dad went through a dating lady. It's not a, you know, it's not a prearranged marriage, but back in Hong Kong at that time, he was too busy to date. So there's this lady who, you know, basically is kind of a gossiper who knows all these people, and then they said, oh, you know, your son would be great with this daughter, right? And so they have a picture of them. Actually, people gathered around, and there is a picture of them meeting for the first time on the bridge in a park in Hong Kong. And they have that picture. They actually saved that picture, and it's up in their bedroom somewhere. And that's the first date. And it was an arranged meeting, and ultimately they did get married. It's a long story. That's a much complicated one. But the reality is, you know, my father basically submitted himself to greater and higher authority. And we would do that. We would assume that the higher authority would choose somebody who's best for us, who will meet our requirements, who are suitable for us, right? But here, you know, Hosea has been dictated by God to marry an adulterous woman. Probably not on the first priority list of who he's going to, you know, characteristics of what woman I want to marry. You know, I'm going to marry an adulterous woman who stars in adult videos. You know, I don't think that would be on your list. I mean, you present that to your parents. What do you think they'll say to you? Right? My parents gave me a list. They said, well, first marry a woman. Secondly, marry a Christian woman. And then the whole, you know, race thing came third, I think. You know, and slowly there's a list that you go through. Here, the problem is, how could God tell his prophet, a godly man, to marry an ungodly woman? Because the moral dilemma is this: it has two things. And we're not even second guessing God's choices. We're talking about the word of God. That God is violating his own words. You see, the prescription for a priest to marry in the Old Testament is that he had to marry a virgin. It is a violation of God's law for Hosea to marry an adulterous woman. Not only that, it's a violation of all God's laws in terms of what a godly home should be like. So not only does he have to marry an adulterous woman, but in terms of how his home life is going to be. His home life is going to be a wreck, as you will see. And the reality is, you know, God's intention for a godly home is borne out in all of the Old Testament scriptures. It's all of the God's moral laws. His decrees on how your house should be set up. This is a violation of this whole thing. And so because of that, it's such an affront to the moral consciousness of the righteous people. It is very difficult for us and as commentators on this passage to understand and accept how God could do such a thing to such a man. And so contemporary theologians basically have four views on how you resolve this dilemma. And these four views are basically summarized in these things. Let's see, allegorical, visionary, historical, and historical but. Okay, I'm going to call it historical but because I couldn't find a good word for it. So, first of all, some people say it's an allegory. Okay, the only way to explain this and to explain out the rationale for the moral brokenness of God is that there is no moral conflict because this is purely an allegory. This did not happen. This is a story. This is just a story. Suppose God told a righteous man to marry an ungodly woman. Okay? That's one possibility. Okay? It puts it in the world of fiction rather than non-fiction. Two, it's not historical in the sense that it took place in a historical reality, but rather takes it to an allegory is that it is Hosea's own allegory, that he had a vision from God. And this is what he was supposed to do. And this is what happens if he did it. But it happened in a dream, and it's not historical in terms of real reality. Okay? And again, because it was just a vision, there is no moral concept because God did not decree and make somebody violate the law. The third one is the complete opposite. It's historical. Historical in all regards. It took place in a real world, and Hosea actually married a whore, and probably what they consider a shrine prostitute, a prostitute that worked for some form of temple. And actually had children, real children, but this version comes with a huge moral conflict, that it goes against everything we know about God and God's moral laws as he has dictated and decreed to the Israelites. And there is no denial of what kind of woman this is. There's no denial about the fact that she's a mother to children already. And whatever possible, and in any way possible, when we render the text as literal as possible. Now, we read into it as a historical event that it actually happened, and we have to deal with the facts of what was happening. We have to somehow justify the rendering of the grammar in this passage, these three chapters, in that same manner. If we take it as literal, we have to use the literal interpretation all the way through all three chapters, and that becomes very problematic for the historical group. Because, like I said before, Hosea doesn't write very chronologically and logically. He's very passionate when he writes, and in his passion, he's all over the place. And it's very difficult sometimes to figure out, is he talking about a real woman, Gomer, not Gomer, another woman? And it becomes very complicated. So the problem is that we have to somehow give some justification showing that the great love of God for Israel, that in his great love is able to trump or break his own moral laws. And that somehow it would require for us in this particular perspective to view that God had a moral reversal in him. That the God who never changes not. From eternity past eternity future, decides that he's going to change. And not just change a decision of will, he's actually going to change a moral construct. And this is very difficult to accept, because it goes against everything else we know about Scripture. So that leads us to number 4. And number 4 is what the position most evangelicals take, and that is the position that it is a historical marriage, that this is a reality that happened over 2,000 years ago. But Gomer, rather than being an adulteress, which was true of a woman in her era, that there were a lot of prostitutes, there were a lot of adulterous people, just as it is true in our generation. But rather, she was an adulteress in terms that she was prone to and had the capability of being an adulteress. Okay. Does that make sense to you? Okay. This is where we're going to have to go and explain it literally. That when she married Hosea, okay, she had no actual historical, physical reality of adultery. But she had the capacity and was prone to being adulterous. What does that mean? Well, if you go back to, if you go fast forward to Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus trying to explain the whole concept of adultery, right? Remember that? And he basically, says to the people who were questioning him about this whole moral construct of adultery, what actually constitutes the act of adultery. Jesus said to them? That if you look at a woman with what? Lust in your eyes, what have you done? You've committed adultery already. Have you actually physically committed an act, and have you been labeled as an adulterer? No. At least in the eyes of man. But in the eyes of God, if you have looked lustfully at another person, somebody's disagreeing with me. Somebody is disagreeing with me. If somebody lusts in their heart and in their mind, they have already committed adultery. So for all of you who looked at some movie poster of some hot actor, actress, and dreamed about it and thought about it, you're all adulterers. And that's the reality. And so I think evangelicals basically take this view that, yes, Hosea was going to marry a woman. And this woman, by every definition, was still a virgin woman, but had in her heart a heart of adultery. That she did not actually commit adultery yet, but her persona, her personality. It would be equivalent today, I guess, in money. There's always the girl at high school who, has a reputation of sleeping with a lot of guys. Whether she did or not, it didn't really matter, but the reputation already preceded her. It's kind of like that. So we're going to adopt this view that basically says we're going to look at the text as historical as possible, as literal as possible, but understanding that we cannot actually make her an adulterer with a capital A put on her shirt when she marries Hosea. But she is an adulteress in her heart. That she had the capacity and that she was prone to adulterous thoughts that would ultimately lead into adultery. And this is where the story becomes very interesting. Okay, there's also a textual problem, as you see. If you look at the verse 1 in chapter 3, this is why it becomes very controversial that you can't just take a historical, literal interpretation. Because in the passage, it says this, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man, and it is an adulteress even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. Now, we don't have any raisin cakes here. I believe that Mrs. P made mango. So we have mango cake. Pretend it's mango. So the word here is very, very interesting. I picked ESV. This is ESV. Okay. Here's the problem. If you read NIV, if you got your whatever device and whatever, you pull up NIV. Okay. NIV blurs these words, women, and adulteress, and all these type of things all the time. New American Standard, which is the most wooden version, the most literal interpretation possible, becomes really, really complicated because it's trying to clarify these words, okay? ESV is more literal and leads to a bit of confusion, but that's the one I chose because it kind of helps me demonstrate what's happening over here. The text says, go and show your love to a woman again, okay? The question here, right? Go and show your love to a woman again, right? Go again, love a woman who is loved by another man is ESV's way of trying to deal with the literal words of this passage. So the literal, if you were to take each word and translate it, it says, go and show your love to a woman again. Okay. This is kind of very complicated. Does it mean that Hosea is supposed to go and be an adulterer and show his love to another woman? Is it one woman we're dealing with or two women? In other words, is it a new woman that we're dealing with in this text? Or a more likely interpretation, which is the one that we've adopted in version 4, historical but, is that it is the same woman. It is Gomer, but Gomer in a new role. You get what I'm saying? Now, basically, when he married Gomer, she was a woman that met all the specifications of the law for you to marry as a priest. Okay? With all the intention of being and establishing a godly home with this woman. But this woman, in turn, has an adulterous heart and ultimately commits adultery. And as she commits adultery, she becomes another woman. And Hosea is then commanded to go, what? And love this woman again. This another woman. So this is where, trying to figure chapters 1 through 3 out is very difficult, because is 1 and 3, these 2 chapters, is it the same woman? And here is where you get into all the sexual criticism kind of stuff. Oh my goodness. Lucky you don't have to read through all that, and I have to tell you and interpret it. So here it is. First of all, the interpretation in the Old Testament Hebrew and in the New Testament Greek of how they translated this is still not clear. The problem is this: woman can either mean woman, as in terms of a physical human being, as in male and female. There's a woman, but it also can mean wife. Now, that is one of those crazy type of words that they used back then that was confusing, because even in Jesus' time he had the problem as well. Because remember, he said something to his mother, right? What does he say to his mother? Woman, it is not yet my time, right? And then if we said that in our modern society, if we came up to some female and just say, "Hey, woman," it's rather derogatory, right? But here, in their context, we're not exactly sure how to interpret this. Are we talking about the word woman as just in a female? Are we actually talking about a wife? And this becomes problematic. There must be another defining term within the text that helps us understand that term woman. Like I said, context is all that's important, right, in terms of trying to interpret that word. And so the defining word in this text is actually what? The woman you need to love, right? The woman to love. Love here is very interesting, because the love word here is actually very specific. It is the love that is demonstrated between a man and a woman who are married. It is the love of a husband, okay? And so on grammatical grounds, the argument for chapter 3 is that go and show your love to another woman is the love that a husband shows to a wife. And hence, the only possible solution to understanding the text is the woman that God is referring to, that he should love, is the wife of a husband. And Hosea has but one wife. And out of that logic, it is very clear. If you read Akil and Denzik, his commentary on this is very clear that the term love here is never used in any other context in Scripture for fornication or adultery. The word love here is used very specifically for the love that a husband shows his wife, not the word that, Donald Trump loves Stormy Daniels. That's not how the word love is used. It is clear that it is shown that it is a love for a husband to his wife, and that is the love. And so now we come to that text, and we have these 3 chapters laid out before us. We have chapter 1, and you really can break these 3 passages into 3 parts. Chapter 1, verses 2 through to chapter 2, okay, which is what we read. Chapter 2 by itself, and then chapter 3 from 1 to 5. And what you find in these 3 is that you have a repeated theme, that there is the sin of Israel that is described in the first part, and there's condemnation associated with that. And then the second part, of course, there is a description of the judgment that's going to be issued by God upon Israel, and then the promise of restoration. Now, you can talk about it in terms of thematics, but you can also look at it holistic, and that's the way I think I'm probably going to go with it. in chapter 1, you have a picture. You have a picture of a man and a woman and their relationship. Supposedly ideal when you get married, but as life has shown, marriages fall apart. And in this particular case, the marriage falls apart because of adultery. And that's the proclamation in the second chapter. And then the theme goes back to another picture in the third chapter, a picture of salvation and restoration. And so this is kind of important for us to note. Second thing we want to look at today, of course, is the people inside of the passages. Now, in the first chapter of the text, it revolves the name of people, and the people's names are very important. These people's names are not just random names, but they're very specific. We already talked about Hosea. Hosea, of course, is the name in salvation. And in this text, it's very clear in this text that Hosea is going to be the representative of God. He's going to be God's picture in this text. And he is nothing less than salvation. That's what he's going to do. He's going to save Gomer. And of course, Gomer is important. Gomer's name is not often spoken, but it, of course, is also a pictorial representation. But what we find is that her name means consumption. Consumption. Okay? And the father of Gomer, Diliam, refers to a fig cakes pressed together. I don't know, Tom may know better. In the Middle East, they have cakes made of figs. And these cakes are supposedly very delicious. But it means that the cakes are then pressed together into one big, sweet, massive lump. And so in the worst case, the name Gomer represents the sweetness of temptation of the cakes and the consumption of these cakes. Or in other words, that you're tempted and you're consumed. We're talking about, of course, that Israel has been involved in consuming something that was tempted. That they were tempted and they consumed. And of course, we know historically what has happened at this point is that Israel has what? Bowed down to Baal. At this time they began to worship Baal rather than worshiping God himself. But there is a sense in which Gomer represents the sweet thing in which salvation is sweetness. Right? That God delights and seeks that for us to be consumed, to consume his salvation, his sweetness. Of course, this is the goal of salvation, to live in spiritual unity with God and to enjoy all the blessings that God has for us. That our cup runneth over. And in this sense, then Gomer and Hosea are set out the whole theme of the book. And God choosing Gomer for salvation and blessing, that she is a sweet thing to God, the object of God's desire. But she chooses to consummate the relationship with Baal. And so this is very like Tolkien, Lord of the Rings kind of stuff there. But I think in general, people would say this, that Gomer is a representation of the sins of Israel. Hosea is a representation of God's salvation. And of course, there are 3 children. In chapter 1, we read that there are 3 children. These 3 children's names are very important. They are the children of Hosea, basically. At the end of the day, they are like, their names are like their parents' name. That represent something very important. They've got Jezreel. Jezreel sounds like Israel, right? Jezreel, Israel. And so notice what the Lord says to Hosea. Call your son Jezreel. And what? Israel, by definition, you can say it's the prince who struggles with God. It is part of the interpretation of those words. Jezreel refers to as scattering of God. And so you go from Prince Israel, to Jezreel, which is a prince that is now a vagabond. It's been sent away, scattered. Kind of like, the 2 sons on the prodigal son type of situation. If you remember the historical significance, it was Jehu who finished the house of Ahab at Jezreel. And now at Jezreel, Israel will become scattered into the valley of Jezreel, and the Assyrians would actually defeat them in the battle at that point, and then move them into the capital of Samaria. Second name was Lo Ruhamah. Okay, Lo Ruhamah. It's the name of the second child, which means no mercy. That there will be no mercy offered to the house of Israel at this point. It's contrasting with the mercy of God, of course, that He is showing to Judah. You remember, there's two kingdoms, and they're both happening at the same time. And so, one of the really crazy stories while this is happening, you got to understand that there's a little bit of a hindsight, a clue in the story. If you go up to Isaiah chapter 37, when the Assyrians are going to capture Israel and they're going to overrun them, it is interesting at that time as God is scattering Israel by the Assyrians. The Assyrians cannot fire a shot into the city of Jerusalem, even though they had surrounded the city. Read that. Isaiah chapter 37. Very fascinating. Like God is protecting Jerusalem, though He is allowing the Assyrians to scatter them. And not a single shot goes into the holy city. Very fascinating. Last name, Lo Amin. Lo Amin, it is the third child. It's not finished. Gomer is the third child. We're not sure at this point whether this child is actually Hosea's. In fact, the name of the child is curious because the child's name is not mine. And so you're thinking, did Hosea really birth this child with his wife, or he didn't? Because, imagine, your parents introduce you. Oh, this is John, this is Eileen, this is not mine. It's crazy out there, right? So, basically, the name says God has now said, these are not my people. They're no longer God's people. God will not be them. But it's not really true. It's kind of. The judgment is going to be complete. This is, that they're scattered without mercy, without the presence of God. This is probably a better way of interpreting it. Let's not miss the lesson here that, if you sin, you are going to be judged. And there is going to be punishment. And no sooner than Hosea says that, we see that God, who says He is just, is going to also save them. And we find out in the last part. So there's a proclamation that comes in. We're running out of time. I'm going to try to do this quickly. Interesting? No. Yes? So you're kind of falling asleep. If you read chapter 2, you'll find that chapter 2 is very fragmented. Chapter 1 is very logical. It tells a story, a love story about children. So chapter 2 becomes very fragmented because all of a sudden, if you're trying to find linear logic in chapter 2, forget it. Okay? Because Hosea is now writing with passion. Because he realizes that the people, this is what's going to happen. The people, this is what's going to happen to the people. The nation's going to be punished. They're going to be declared not mine by God. And it hurts, it tears them apart. And he begins to write with passion in chapter 2. And, passionate people are very irrational people. When you're in love and fall in love for the first time, you suddenly don't become yourself. You suddenly lose it. There was a guy here graduated many years ago. His name was Mike Mack. Mike Mack finally got married last year. I think it was last year. 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Mike Mack finally got married. And I remember Mike Mack watched all his friends start dating. And he said, I'm smarter than this. I'm wiser than this. And he had all these rules about dating. First of all, his famous saying, I still believe and breathe and tell every young frosh that comes into the water, this is what Mike Mack has to say. Love makes you stupid. It's true. Those of you who watch your friends fall in love suddenly realize that they've become a totally irrational being all of a sudden. Right? And Mike Mack said, love makes you stupid. And the second rule is that upper freshmen, graduating class people should not ever date a frosh. Because he did the math, You know the math, right? Never date anyone half your age plus 7, right? Never heard of it? Might have. How many of you heard of that one before? Yes, there's hands, the older generation. Learn something. This is what Mike Mack always taught the first year's Frosh in his granting on DG group. He always taught them. One, love makes you stupid. So if your friends suddenly tell you that you are not acting rational, it's probably chances are you follow. Two, never date a Frosh as an upper year. And that's because of the math. And you can figure it out. Date half your age plus 7. Okay. By the way, Mike Mack in his last term, dated a Frosh. Broke all his rules, said that she was very mature for her age. It went through the summer, and he graduated, he left, and they broke up. It was one of the worst breakups I've ever seen. So, just to tell you that love does make you stupid. When you read through the text, you find this. It jumps from all over the place, but if you pay very careful attention to the essence of what Hosea's trying to say, it makes a lot of sense. Basically, he says this: Israel is sick. He sees Israel sin. It's killing him. 2, Israel's going to get punished for sin. And that's going to kill him too. It hurts. And basically, if you read it, you find that, Israel commits spiritual adultery. They attribute the blessings that they have, not from God, but from Baal. Okay? And that in this whole downward spiral, they forget about Jehovah altogether. And these themes are often repeated in the text, but I just kind of summarized it. And then, of course, ultimately, how will Israel be punished by God? And of course, he will take away the blessings that he had given. He's going to expose her for her nakedness in verse 10, and he's going to prevent her from going to her other love. Okay, so that's all in chapter 2. But of course, the key is now in chapter 2, verse 14, is the whole restoration process. And starting in chapter 2:14, you find these verses that God begins to pursue Israel and pursue Israel by alluring Israel back. And he says this: Therefore, I'm going to lure her. I'm going to lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards, and I'll make the valley of Achor. Achor means trouble. Okay, a door of hope. And she will sing as in the days of her youth, as in the days she came out of Egypt. And so, what you find in chapter 2, one of the most beautiful messianic visions ever presented, that Israel received God as her lover, as her husband, and you find that the words used are very important there. It's not Baal, but either Ishi, right? Lover husbands, as opposed to respecting God as Lord. The God wants you not to obey him because he is lording over you, but rather obey him because he is the love of your love. And God, as Israel's husband, will pour out all his blessings, all those messianic blessings upon her. And this is, of course, the fulfillment of the covenant, the messianic covenant. In this illustration, God presents the fulfillment of what he has promised Israel. Israel become Romaha, meaning loved, and of course, Ami, my people. There will be a day in which all this will reckon together. You can look at Deuteronomy chapter 26. That's God's people will be God's people. And God will be their God. All right. I have 1 minute left. Second picture. I'll get to that. That's the second picture. Oh, one more. So if you continue reading on, you'll find that this is a very interesting text. We already mentioned this love between a husband and wife. That's the love that's being used here. That's what is mentioned. But given that Gomer has been mentioned here in chapter 3, what has happened is that she has gone so far into adultery. So it's not just a lust of the eyes, a lust of the heart. She actually gone so far into adultery that she has left her marital home at this point. Right? In chapter 3, that's why God tells Hosea to go and get his wife back, to love that other woman. The woman that you married has now become a different woman. She's become an adulterous woman. And so, chances are he's moved out of the house, Hosea's house, and joined with another house. And so what we find in the story is that Hosea actually finds his wife, and he purchases her. He buys her back from the other man. The cost would be equivalent to what the cost of a slave is to pay for her to come back. You can read about that in Exodus chapter 21, about if you want to purchase a slave, what it costs you, the amount of silver and barley that you have to pay up. Barley was an offering. This is very interesting. Barley was an offering to a woman who was accused of unchastity. You can read about that in Numbers chapter 5. Anyways, the point is this. The point is that her worth now is equivalent to a slave, which is the lowest worth value a human has. And yet, she's loved by God, Hosea. Salvation. She would be saved. She has sinned. She's turned to other gods. She's left the home. She's eaten those raisin cakes, those damn raisin cakes. We're never serving raisin cakes. Never be raisin cakes. She's going to be punished. And ultimately, if you read chapter 3, that she's going to live with her husband in a seclusion. But her living as a prisoner, in a sense, is the picture of the Assyrian captivity of Israel that's going to come about because of the punishment of the sin of Israel. And then, of course, in that, you remember in that time, the timeline shows that after those kings in the Assyrian realm, there were no more kings. There's no more Israel at all. There's no prince, there's no king, there's no priest at this point. There's no Urim, there's no Thummim, there's no Ephod. Everything's gone. And so, effectively, seclusion. And at that point in history, Israel has no control over her destiny. Not through God, not through divination, not through anything. There is great punishment for Israel. But the conclusion of chapter 3 says that there is salvation here, that the Israelites will seek their Lord. They will seek King David, that's messianic prophecy, reflection of Jesus Christ. They'll be trembling when they come into God's blessings. And this is a picture. This is the picture. The picture is, there is sin. There is judgment. But there is salvation. It was true for them back then, and it's true for us today. Though we sin, though we may suffer the consequences, the punishment, God never forsakes us. As much as He hates what we've done, abhors how we put Him aside, how we tasted other gods, the salvation is there. You found yourself running away from God, and you have become adulterous in your eyes. Turn back to Him. He is waiting. He wants to bless you. Read chapter 3. See how God wants to make your life great. It's not make America great, it's make your life great. Ask Brad to make us great.
May you all please rise. Because your love has placed me my word. Oh, Christ, my King of sympathy, secure and your grace extends, call me friend, your mercy sets me free. I know I'm not worthy to love on your name.
Spirit and soul and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. For he who calls you is faithful, and you surely do it now until he returns. After time of meditation, we're dismissed. Oh, I took it. I think I get better. I don't know. Good job, guys.
Thanks. Hey, Pastor Tom. How are you? Good. And you? Well, good. How are you? Good.
Okay, because I was thinking,